This adventurous story begins with a house located right in the middle of a forest. Inside the house, a husband, wife, and their daughter, Becky, lived. They had recently moved there to spend their holidays away from the city. What was surprising was that there was nothing around the house. It was completely deserted. One night, when Becky was trying to sleep in her room, she felt an odd sensation. She had a feeling that something dangerous, like a shadow or spirit, was nearby. Despite this, she couldn't sleep and repeatedly tried to tell her mother, but her mother dismissed it, saying it was just her imagination and that if she went to sleep properly, she would not see anything. Becky, trusting her mother's words, went back to bed. But suddenly, the door opened on its own. Becky was startled because she had locked it. She went back to close it, but it opened again. This time, she was so scared that she pretended to sleep. As she glanced into the darkness near the door, she saw a figure moving toward her. It was not just any figure, it was a dangerous demonic being that resided there. This demon tried to grab Becky. She screamed, but no one could hear her. The demon grabbed her legs and dragged her into the darkness. No one knew what happened to Becky after that. The next morning, when her parents were preparing breakfast, Becky appeared, but her face showed no emotions. Her father told her to sit at the table and have breakfast, scolding her a little. But then, Becky, behaving very strangely, picked up a knife from the table and began stabbing her father. It was so terrifying that it was hard to show. Becky's face, now completely possessed by the demon, revealed that the demon was controlling her. Despite her father's attempts to escape, Becky kept attacking him until he collapsed. Her father, writhing in pain, died right there. After a while, when Becky's mother arrived and saw the scene, she was left stunned. She saw that Becky was completely possessed by the demon, and her husband had been brutally killed. What could she do in such a situation? Becky's mother didn't know how to react, but the dangerous demon inside Becky noticed her mother. So, Becky, under the demon's control, picked up the knife and attacked her mother, killing her as well. In a single moment, the demon had possessed Becky, causing the deaths of both her parents in a horrific manner. Days passed, and the caretaker of the house called two men for an investigation. These men, named Jack and Jonathan, were paranormal experts who researched ghostly and demonic activities and provided reports on such incidents. The caretaker had called them due to the recent events at the house. Jack, equipped with advanced tools, set them up around the house to detect paranormal activities. On the other hand, Jonathan, who believed in spiritual matters and ancient rituals, felt that spirits and demonic forces were real and could only be dealt with in a spiritual way. Jack, however, had a different perspective. He didn't believe in demonic forces at all. He took on the job of paranormal detective simply to find evidence to prove that ghosts or demonic entities existed. Jack's belief was that such phenomena were merely the result of changes in the human mind that made people behave strangely. Afterward, people would label these occurrences as demonic or ghostly. The next day, the caretaker sat down with Jack and Jonathan and provided them with several files. He explained the information they needed to focus on, looking for signs of paranormal activity. The caretaker mentioned that the owners of the house had called the two men for this investigation and wanted them to determine what demonic powers were present in the house, which were responsible for the brutal deaths of people who came there. The caretaker then showed John and Jonathan some photos of people who had stayed at the house, but none of them had survived for more than 3 days. Each of them had died in some horrific way, and the deaths were incredibly terrifying. The caretaker also told them about the family, whose daughter was possessed by a demon and ended up killing her own parents. After the investigation, the girl's dead body was found on the roof. John and Jonathan were now tasked with finding out who or what was behind these events. The caretaker made it clear that they would be given a chance to stay for 3 days, and if they managed to solve the mystery, they would be rewarded with $100,000. However, the condition was that all the doors of the house would be locked, and their car keys would be taken away so they could not escape. The large amount of money convinced both Jonathan and John to agree to the terms. The caretaker locked all the doors, meaning John and Jonathan had to investigate the house based on their experiences. John began setting up his advanced equipment around the house to detect any paranormal activity. Jonathan, on the other hand, claimed that he had the ability to see spirits, so he didn't need any equipment. John simply replied that he didn't believe in spirits but trusted in science, which, according to him, could detect energy in its various forms. Both experts then continued their investigation in their own ways. As Jonathan explored the house, he suddenly saw a baby's bicycle moving on its own. When he approached it, the bicycle stopped, and he assumed it was caused by the wind. Meanwhile, John continued his investigation and moved upstairs to the room where Becky's body had been found. As he entered the room, the door suddenly closed on its own. When John saw the door close by itself, he thought it might just be a faulty door. but as he started moving away, the door shut again on its own. This startled John, and he checked his devices to see if there were any fluctuations, and indeed, he detected some. He couldn't understand what was happening, as he had always done his investigations at night, believing that demons and ghosts usually appeared at night. But now, he was getting strong vibrations during the day, which made him wonder if it was due to the magnetic forces of the forest interfering with his equipment, preventing it from working properly. As John and Jonathan continued their investigation, they bumped into each other, which startled them both. At this point, Jonathan showed John an old gun that was still in working condition. They decided to keep the gun for protection. However, despite their cooperation, neither John trusted Jonathan, nor did Jonathan trust John. As night approached, Jonathan decided to perform a ritual. He lit candles around the room and sprinkled some powder in a circle. He placed a strange board in front of him, which was used to communicate with spirits. John, curious about the ritual, also showed up to observe. Jonathan explained that he was attempting to communicate with the demonic spirit in the house, and if it was present, it would try to contact him through the board. After a while of focusing, nothing happened, and no spirits appeared. John began mocking Jonathan, calling him useless. This upset Jonathan, and he retorted by mentioning John's wife, saying that she had left him because of his nature. This remark angered John, and he angrily left the room. At this point, we learn that John's wife had died some time ago, apparently due to some paranormal activity. John kept only a locket of hers, which he kept close to him. He went to his room and fell asleep. Meanwhile, Jonathan, who was still performing his ritual, began to feel a presence near him. He sensed that a spirit might be close. And it was the same demonic force that resided in the house. Now, it connected with all of Jonathan's ritual techniques and began writing on the board. Jonathan, after interpreting it, wrote in his book, and the message clearly stated, 2 nights left. Jonathan had conducted numerous paranormal investigations before, but this demonic force he had encountered was unlike anything he'd experienced. It was incredibly dangerous and devilish. After reading the message, Jonathan understood that something would happen to both of them in the next 2 nights. Either the demonic force would attack them, just as it had done with the others. However, Jonathan chose not to share this with John. The animosity between them was growing. The next day, they both continued their separate investigations. While John was asleep, he had strange dreams. He saw a ghost sitting at the bar, and these eerie events woke him up. He then noticed a shadow by the door. He went outside to check but found nothing. The next day, John focused on investigating the paranormal activities around the house. Jonathan came to him and told him that he had communicated with the demon and it had mentioned the 2 nights. However, John didn't believe any of Jonathan's words because of the earlier mocking of his wife. The two of them had now completely distanced themselves from one another. To continue his investigation, Jonathan set up motion sensors around the house so that any movement could be detected, and he also installed cameras in every corner. He tried again to convince John, stressing that they had to be cautious. He warned that after tonight, the demon's attacks would escalate. As John was investigating, he suddenly heard the sound of someone running. He rushed to the kitchen area and saw numerous flies gathered on the walls and windows. There was nothing in that area that would explain the flies' presence. Then, unexpectedly, he saw the spirit of the little girl, Becky, at the top of the stairs. As soon as she saw John, she started running away. Determined to uncover the truth, John decided to follow the spirit. However, after going upstairs, the spirit disappeared into the distance. Jonathan soon joined John and asked what he had seen. John told him that he had seen the spirit of the girl named Becky. Jonathan showed him a photo of Becky, and after seeing it, John confirmed that it was indeed the same girl. For the first time, a slight trace of fear appeared on John's face, as he was experiencing these things in reality for the first time. Jonathan realized that the spirit had become active and would surely attack them. Suddenly, they heard a noise from one of the rooms, so they both went to investigate. Inside the room, they found a doll with its head cut off, and blood was oozing from it. When John checked the blood, he realized it was fresh, which made him understand that there were indeed demonic forces present in the house. From that day onwards, John became quite depressed and focused more on his investigation. Little did he know that in just a few days, he would be in the same condition as the other victims. Frustrated by all the terrifying events, Jonathan took out a holy book that could be used to banish ghosts and spirits. John, realizing the severity of the situation, had no choice but to follow the instructions in the book, as he was now certain that spirits were indeed present in the house. He gave Jonathan a walkie-talkie to communicate, as they didn't have any mobile phones. Jonathan started searching the book for ways to protect themselves from the spirit. Meanwhile, John continued his investigation and traveled to the basement. Without thinking much, he went inside. The basement was very dark, and there were strange markings on the walls. As Jonathan was reading the book, he suddenly noticed a red demon, its eyes glowing bright red, slowly moving toward him. Jonathan realized the danger and quickly turned around, but by the time he looked, the demon was gone. Feeling uneasy, Jonathan used the walkie-talkie to contact John. Jonathan was repeatedly urging John to come out of the basement, but John couldn't hear him. He was deep into his investigation and made his way to a large wall where strange circular structures were drawn. These structures were made of fresh blood, and there were cryptic markings written around the area that John couldn't make sense of at the moment. As he was investigating, suddenly, the ghost of the girl, Becky, appeared and screamed loudly. John saw her and got terrified. Though the spirit didn't harm him, the fear overwhelmed him. Meanwhile, Jonathan was moving toward the basement, but as he reached the door, it slammed shut on its own. He saw a figure standing in the distance. At first, Jonathan thought it was John continuing his investigation, but when the figure came closer, he realized it was the spirit of Becky's father. The ghost looked incredibly menacing and angry. The spirit pulled a knife from behind his back and moved toward Jonathan to attack. Jonathan raised his hand to defend himself, and the knife struck, injuring him deeply. As Becky's father's spirit retreated, Jonathan was left with a severe wound. After some time, John and Jonathan reunited, and John helped Jonathan by bandaging his wound. At least now, they both understood that the spirits in the house were trying to kill them. Just then, an old phone in the house started ringing. Jonathan was already on edge because the phone lines had been cut earlier. He was confused about who could be calling. When he picked up the receiver, a voice on the other end said, "I am John's wife." Jonathan handed the phone to John and told him that it was his wife. John was stunned when the voice on the other end began to speak, saying, "You had a chance to save me, but you didn't. I died because of you." Hearing this, John was completely shocked. His wife had died a long time ago, so how could she be calling now? He realized that this was no ordinary phone call, it was the work of a spirit. This revelation left John deeply disturbed, and he sat down, confiding in Jonathan, realizing that, in a way, he was responsible for everything that had happened. John's wife had always believed in black magic and spirits. She would often tell him that a demon was following her and that she needed to escape it. However, John never believed her, dismissing her fears as irrational. One night, things escalated, and when John returned home, he found his wife covered in blood in the bathtub, holding a knife. She told him, "This demon is making me do these things, and you never believed me." In that moment, the demon struck, slashing his wife's throat, and she died right there. From that point on, John blamed himself for not listening to her and felt responsible for her death. Jonathan, seeing John's despair, stood by him and supported him during this difficult time. Jonathan urged John to become stronger because they were surrounded by dangerous demons and spirits. He emphasized that they needed to adopt certain techniques to protect themselves and prevent any further harm. After much preparation, the two of them gathered various weapons from around the house for protection. While going through the house, John noticed a photo frame with an old picture of a family. Upon closer inspection, he saw the caretaker, the elderly man who had left them in the house. This man seemed impossibly old, and after thinking about it, they realized that he was no longer alive. The caretaker must have been a spirit himself, likely trying to trap them in this house. As they examined the photo further, they saw eerie symbols and messages, including the phrase "demon's revenge." They understood that something terrible was about to happen to them. The photo also provided a chilling backstory. Many years ago, the owner's son was involved in multiple murders. His violent crimes were so severe that he was killed in a brutal manner. The girl's spirit, possibly his daughter, had transformed into a demon, which they now believed was the red demon haunting the house and causing harm to others. Realizing the depth of the danger, John and Jonathan found themselves trapped in the room, unsure of what the next move would be, as they were now in the demon's domain. The threat of the demonic forces had become much clearer, and they were desperate to find a way out. They had to get rid of the demon and leave the place, as all the doors were locked. Jonathan now tells John about a ritual technique and asks him to create a circular path to prevent the demon from escaping. He plans to try to contact the demon. After a while, when Jonathan is deeply focused, he hears some noises behind him. Without thinking, he steps out of the circle and follows the sound. When he goes downstairs, he sees a strange lady who looks very dangerous. She attacks John, causing him to scream. Jonathan hears his scream and rushes to help, but when he reaches him, he faces the ghost of Becky. As they both go downstairs, they collide with each other. John is now terrified and says that he truly saw a ghost. They start arguing, when suddenly the door opens and the ghost of the dangerous lady appears. Jonathan, scared, shoots her, hitting her, and she falls down. Jonathan realizes that just like spirits can hurt them, they can also destroy the spirits' bodies to eliminate them. After these incidents, John and Jonathan are both deeply shaken, but a bigger danger is yet to come, a very dangerous man with a hideous face and eyes completely red. This giant man attacks them, and John fights back with a sharp weapon. They both try hard to kill the dangerous man. Though they succeed in stopping him temporarily, he isn't dead yet. John and Jonathan flee in separate directions. John reaches a room where he sees a man sitting on a sofa with a very distorted face. The dangerous man advances towards John, ready to attack. But John defends himself with a sharp weapon, stabbing the man in the stomach, and he dies on the spot. Meanwhile, Jonathan, following another sound, comes face to face with Becky's ghost. She immediately attacks him, but Jonathan manages to save himself from her. He sprinkles holy powder on her, causing Becky's ghost to vanish. Now, Jonathan tries to find John to ensure that he's safe. As John enters another room, he sees his wife, but she appears in very bad condition. She only says, "You had a chance, but you didn't save me." In a way, the demonic spirit is trying to weaken John and repeatedly steps closer to him. But John understands that this is not his wife. He focuses and places a cross in front of the demonic spirit, causing the spirit immense pain, and it disappears. Now, John fully trusts Jonathan's actions, so they sit together and start chanting the ritual's mantras. As the ritual is being performed, the dangerous demon, known as the Red Demon, begins to emerge. When the gates of hell open, it is drawn inside. Jonathan thinks that they have successfully banished the demon. However, suddenly, John attacks Jonathan because the demon is now inside him. Jonathan realizes that he must protect himself, or he too will be killed. Jonathan grabs a knife and kills John, then opens the door to leave. Jonathan believes that this is the end of the demon, but we see that the demon is still following him. It says, "I won't leave so easily," indicating that it has now possessed Jonathan. 3 days later, Jonathan is dead, and the demon takes his soul with it. And that is how this terrifying story ends.